There's a story about Cassandra from Greek mythology that everyone knows but nobody really thinks about. Apollo gave her the gift of prophecy, the ability to see the future clearly. But when she rejected him, he cursed her so that no one would ever believe her predictions. She warned the Trojans not to bring the wooden horse into the city. She told them exactly what would happen, that Greek soldiers were hiding inside, that it would destroy Troy. They called her mad, locked her up, brought the horse in anyway. Everything she said would happen happened exactly as she predicted. The city burned, everyone died, and in those final moments when Troy was falling, the people who'd called her crazy finally believed her. But by then it was too late to matter. She'd spent years being right, while everyone treated her like she was broken. And the vindication came only after the destruction she'd tried to prevent. This is what happens when proof finally surfaces. This experience of seeing danger before others acknowledge it happens in every corner of human life. Someone notices their friend is being used by another person who only shows up when they need something. They mention it gently and get accused of being jealous or judgmental. Someone sees their family enabling destructive behavior and speaks up, only to be labeled the troublemaker who can't just let things be. Someone watches a relationship deteriorating and tries to warn the people involved, and those people tell them to mind their own business or that they don't understand the full situation. The person who sees clearly gets pushed away, excluded from conversations, treated like they're the problem for naming the problem. Meanwhile, everyone else continues pretending everything is fine because pretending is easier than dealing with reality. Then the situation explodes exactly as predicted, and suddenly everyone is in crisis mode, trying to understand how this happened when someone literally told them it was happening. Most people think the issue is they didn't explain themselves well enough. They replay the conversation wondering if they should have been nicer about it, less direct, more patient in letting people figure it out themselves. So next time they see something problematic, they try to package it more carefully. They drop hints instead of saying it straight. They ask gentle questions hoping to lead people to the conclusion without stating it outright. They think people rejected their warning because of how they said it, when actually people rejected it because hearing it would mean having to do something uncomfortable. Nobody wants to confront their friend about being used. Nobody wants to admit their family is dysfunctional. Nobody wants to end a relationship that's failing. So they shoot the messenger instead, and the messenger walks away thinking they should have found better words, when the words were never the problem. What keeps this pattern alive is everyone's been taught that good people don't create conflict. You're supposed to assume the best in others, give people chances, not jump to conclusions. These are fine principles until they become excuses for ignoring obvious red flags. When someone points out a real problem, they're disrupting the peace, making people uncomfortable, refusing to just go with the flow. So they get managed rather than heard. People say things like, "I hear your concerns," and then do absolutely nothing about those concerns. The group stays comfortable by treating the truth, tell her as overly negative or dramatic, and that feels justified because, yes, pointing out problems does make people uncomfortable. Later, when everything falls apart, the group rewrites history. They tell themselves nobody could have seen this coming. They did the best they could. There were no clear signs. The person who gave them clear signs gets erased from the story because remembering them would mean admitting they chose comfort over truth and paid for it. The world punishes people who see problems early and rewards them only after those problems become impossible to ignore. During the warning phase, they get isolated. People stop inviting them to things because they're always so negative. Relationships get strained because they won't pretend everything is fine when it isn't. They watch people they care about walk into obvious traps and have to choose between saying something and losing the relationship, or staying quiet and watching the damage happen. Either way, they lose. Then the crisis hits, and suddenly, the same people who froze them out are asking for help, not apologizing for ignoring them, not acknowledging they were right, just needing their insight now that ignoring the problem isn't an option anymore. The vindication comes without the apology. The recognition comes without the respect, and they're expected to just move forward like those years of being dismissed didn't happen. The cost of not seeing this pattern is you spend years thinking you're the problem. Everyone else seems fine with the situation, unbothered by the things that worry you, confident that you're overreacting. So you start doubting yourself. Maybe you are too suspicious. Maybe you do see problems where there aren't any. Maybe you should trust what everyone else thinks instead of what you're observing with your own eyes. You learn to stay quiet even when you see danger coming, because speaking up only makes you the villain. You watch things fall apart exactly as you knew they would, and you think maybe if you just said it differently, people would have listened. You blame yourself for their refusal to hear you, and that blame keeps you trapped in situations where your clarity is treated as a character flaw instead of valuable information. Then one day the proof shows up, and you can't be called paranoid anymore. You're not learning anything new because you knew all along, but you understand something different now. Their dismissal wasn't about you being wrong. It was about them not being ready to deal with being right. You threatened their comfort, their story about how things were fine, their ability to avoid taking action. So they made you the problem instead of facing the actual problem. Now that reality has forced their hand, and they can't ignore it anymore. They need what they told you didn't matter. The validation doesn't feel good. It just confirms that you were never crazy, just inconvenient. Two paths open up from here. One path is learning to hide what you see until people are ready to see it. You become more careful about what you say and when you say it. You watch people make mistakes you could help them avoid, but you stay quiet because you've learned that helping early just gets you punished. You wait for permission to be right, and you call this being wise or picking your battles. You stay in relationships where your perception only matters after the damage is done. The other path is harder and lonelier. You stop expecting people to value what you see until they have no choice. You say what's true without softening it. You let people make their choices and live with their consequences without trying to save them from what they're choosing. And when they come back after the crisis needing your help, you decide whether they've earned it or whether being dismissed was too expensive to forgive. George Orwell wrote that, in a time of deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. People quote that about politics and governments, but it applies to every relationship and group dynamic where comfort matters more than accuracy. When everyone agrees to ignore a problem, the person who names it becomes the threat, not because they're wrong, but because being right would require everyone else to admit they were avoiding something they should have addressed. The truth doesn't need to be complicated or controversial to get you labeled a troublemaker. It just needs to be inconvenient. And once you're labeled, the group protects itself by dismissing you until the cost of dismissing you becomes higher than the cost of admitting you were right all along. They unmask proof you were always right, and now they're dealing with exactly what you said would happen. And some of them want you involved in fixing it. What they're not offering is acknowledgement that you saw this coming. No apology for making you feel crazy. No recognition of what it cost you to be right when being right made you the outsider. They just need what you know now, that knowing it has become unavoidable for them. This is the moment that shows you who people really are. Not when they need you during their crisis, but how they treated you before the crisis when warning them would have prevented it. Some people only value truth when ignoring it hurts more than facing it. And by then, the person who tried to tell them the truth has usually learned that being right early just means being alone until being right becomes useful to someone else's agenda. Just because something isn't a lie does not mean that it isn't deceptive. A liar knows that he is a liar, but one who speaks mere portions of truth in order to deceive is a craftsman of destruction. You've met these people. They never actually lie to you. If you confronted them with recordings and transcripts, every word they said would technically be accurate. But somehow you still end up with a completely wrong understanding of the situation, and when it all falls apart, they can point to exactly what they said and show you they never lied. They just didn't mention the other half, the part that would have changed everything, the context that would have made you decide differently. They gave you puzzle pieces that were all real, but they only gave you enough pieces to build the picture they wanted you to see, not the picture that actually existed. This is more dangerous than lying, because liars can be caught and confronted. But someone who tells careful truths designed to create false impressions never has to own the deception. You misunderstood, they'll say. You made assumptions. They told you exactly what happened. It's not their fault you filled in the blanks wrong. Watch how this works in real life, and you'll see it everywhere. Someone asks if they can borrow money and you ask what it's for. They tell you their rent is due, which is true. What they don't mention is the rent is due because they spent the rent money on something else, or that this is the 4th time this year, or that they have no plan to pay you back. Every word true. Every word designed to hide the reality that would make you say no. Someone tells you they're leaving their job because they want new challenges, which is technically accurate. They do want new challenges. They're just not mentioning they were about to be fired, or that they've been pushed out of 3 jobs in 2 years for the same issues, or that the new challenges they want are ways to avoid the problems they keep creating. You hire them based on partial truth and discover the full truth 6 months later when the same patterns emerge. Or someone tells you about a conflict they had with another person, and every fact they share is accurate, but they've carefully selected which facts to share so you'll take their side. They mention what the other person said and did. They don't mention what they said and did first, or the context that explains the reaction, or the pattern of behavior that led to this moment. The reason this type of deception is so effective is that it exploits your assumption that people are giving you the information you need to make informed decisions. When someone tells you something, you naturally assume they're giving you the relevant facts, not just the facts that serve their interests. You don't think to ask about what they're not saying because you don't know what's missing. They've built a picture that seems complete, and you make your choice based on that picture. By the time you discover what was left out, you've already invested time or money or emotion or reputation, and extracting yourself costs more than it would have if you'd known the full truth up front. And here's the really insidious part when you confront them. They have perfect deniability. They never lied. They told you the truth. If you made wrong assumptions based on incomplete information, that's on you for not asking better questions. They've set up a situation where your reasonable expectation of honest communication becomes your fault for being naive. These people are more dangerous than outright liars because society has taught you how to deal with liars, but not how to deal with strategic truth tellers. When someone lies, you can call them a liar, set boundaries, tell others to be careful. But when someone carefully selects true facts to create false impressions, what do you call them? If you try to warn others, you sound paranoid because technically everything they said was accurate. You find yourself trying to explain that yes, what they said was true, but here's what they didn't say, and here's why that matters, and you can hear how it sounds. Like you're reading too much into things. Like you're assuming bad intent. Like maybe you're the problem for not taking people at face value. They've constructed a situation where defending yourself makes you look unreasonable, and they get to keep their reputation for honesty while continuing to deceive everyone who trusts them. Half of the people lie with their lips and the other half with their tears. You know exactly what this means if you've ever dealt with someone who uses emotion as a weapon. They don't argue with facts or logic because facts can be checked and logic can be countered. Instead, they cry. They break down. They perform such convincing devastation that you forget what you were confronting them about and start comforting them instead. You came into the conversation with a legitimate concern about their behavior, and you're leaving the conversation apologizing for upsetting them. They never addressed what you brought up. They never acknowledged the problem. They just cried until the problem became your cruelty for making them cry. And now you're the one who needs to make amends. The tears are real, but the purpose is manipulation. And that combination makes it almost impossible to resist, because how do you confront someone who's genuinely upset without feeling like a monster? This happens constantly in relationships where one person has learned that emotional displays shut down accountability. They mess up, you try to address it, and suddenly they're sobbing about how terrible they feel, how they're trying so hard, how they can't do anything right, how maybe they should just leave because they're such a burden. None of this addresses what they did wrong. All of it redirects the conversation from their behavior to their feelings. And now you're stuck trying to manage their emotional state instead of solving the actual problem. If you push through the tears and insist on discussing the issue, you're being cold and unsupportive during their vulnerable moment. If you back off and comfort them, the behavior never gets addressed and will definitely happen again. They've set up a situation where holding them accountable requires you to be the bad guy, so most people choose to be the comforter instead, and the pattern continues indefinitely. What makes this so effective is that the emotions are often genuine, which makes it feel wrong to question them. The person really might feel terrible. They really might be overwhelmed. The tears aren't fake, but genuine emotion can still be weaponized. And the fact that someone truly feels bad doesn't mean they're taking responsibility or planning to change. Some people have learned that feeling bad is sufficient, that if they demonstrate enough distress about the impact of their behavior, they don't have to actually modify the behavior. They've discovered that tears buy them forgiveness without requiring growth, sympathy without requiring change, and continued access to people they keep hurting, because those people can't bear to cause them more pain by enforcing boundaries. The emotion becomes a shield against consequences, and over time they get so practiced at deploying it that they might not even consciously realize they're doing it anymore. The people around them end up exhausted and confused because they can never address problems without triggering a crisis. Every conversation about boundaries or concerns or needed changes becomes an emotional emergency where the person who raised the issue ends up managing the feelings of the person whose behavior caused the issue. You learn to stay quiet about things that bother you because bringing them up costs too much emotionally. You accept treatment you shouldn't accept because the alternative is dealing with the breakdown that happens when you try to set limits. You find yourself walking on eggshells, constantly calculating whether something is worth the reaction you'll get if you mention it, and most of the time you decide it's not worth it, which means the person crying their way out of accountability never has to face the cumulative weight of their impact on you, because you're too busy protecting them from the discomfort of that realization. The only way out is recognizing that someone's emotional distress doesn't obligate you to abandon your boundaries. You can acknowledge that they're upset while still maintaining that the behavior needs to change. You can be compassionate about their feelings while refusing to let those feelings derail necessary conversations. It requires developing comfort with being seen as harsh or unsupportive, because people who use tears as manipulation will absolutely frame your boundaries that way. They'll tell themselves and others that you were cruel to them when they were vulnerable, leaving out the part where their vulnerability was a response to being held accountable. But the alternative is spending your life managed by someone else's emotional reactions, never able to express your needs or address problems, because every attempt gets redirected into comforting them. Some people cry to avoid consequences, and if you can't see the pattern, you'll spend years absorbing damage while convincing yourself you're just being supportive. A manipulative person doesn't question themselves. They question you until you start questioning yourself. You walk into a conversation certain about what happened, clear about what you experienced, confident in your perception. You walk out of that conversation wondering if you remembered it wrong, if you're being too sensitive, if maybe you're the one with the problem. Nothing about the facts changed, but somehow your certainty did, because the other person spent the entire conversation not defending their behavior, but questioning your interpretation of it. Did that really happen the way you remember? Are you sure you're not exaggerating? Could you be misreading the situation? Is it possible you're projecting your own issues onto them? By the end, you're not even talking about what they did anymore. You're defending your right to perceive reality accurately, and that's exactly where they want you. This is one of the most effective manipulation tactics, because it doesn't require the manipulator to win the argument about what happened. They just need to introduce enough doubt that you stop trusting your own judgment. When you say they did something hurtful, they don't say, "No, I didn't," because that's too direct and too easy to counter. Instead, they say, I don't remember it that way. Or, that's not what I intended. Or, you seem really upset. Are you okay? They make it about your perception, your memory, your emotional state, anything except their actual behavior. If you have proof, texts, or emails or witnesses, they question your interpretation of the proof. If you describe how something made you feel, they question whether you're being rational. If you point to a pattern, they question whether you're being obsessive or holding grudges. Every response is designed to make you defend yourself instead of them defending themselves. Watch how this plays out over time, and you'll see the damage it causes. You start second-guessing yourself constantly. When something bothers you, instead of addressing it directly, you spend hours analyzing whether it's legitimate enough to mention. You rehearse conversations in your head, trying to anticipate every way they might question your version of events so you can defend it better. You collect evidence of things that happen because you know your memory will be questioned later. You start feeling crazy because your experience of the relationship doesn't match what they keep telling you the relationship is. They say they're supportive, but you feel unsupported. They say they respect your boundaries, but your boundaries keep getting violated. They say they care about your feelings, but somehow your feelings are always the problem. The gap between what they claim and what you experience gets wider, and instead of questioning why they keep claiming things that don't match reality, you question whether your reality is accurate. This works because most people have been taught to doubt themselves before doubting others. You've been told you're too sensitive your whole life, or that you overthink things, or that you take things too personally. So when someone exploits that existing insecurity by constantly questioning your perception, it connects with something you're already worried might be true about yourself. Maybe you are overreacting. Maybe you do remember things wrong. Maybe you're being unfair. The manipulator doesn't have to convince you they're right. They just have to activate your existing self-doubt, and you'll do the rest of the work for them. You'll talk yourself out of your own boundaries. You'll accept treatment you know isn't okay because you can't be certain enough that it's not okay to do anything about it. They've trained you to question yourself so thoroughly that even when you know something is wrong, you can't trust that knowing enough to act on it. The mechanism is simple but devastating. Every time you bring up a legitimate concern and they respond by questioning you instead of addressing the concern, they're teaching you that raising concerns costs more than staying silent. The cost is having to defend your sanity, your memory, your right to feel what you feel. Most people aren't willing to pay that cost repeatedly, so they stop raising concerns. They stop trusting their own perception. They accept the manipulator's version of events because fighting for their own version requires constant, exhausting battles where the reality itself is on trial. The manipulator never has to change because they've successfully shifted the conversation from "your behavior is problematic" to "your perception is questionable." And once that shift happens, they're off the hook and you're stuck trying to prove you're not crazy. The really sinister part is that manipulators often believe their own reframing. They're not sitting in a dark room plotting how to gaslight you. They genuinely believe their version of events because they've practiced questioning others so long that they've lost the ability to question themselves. When you say they hurt you, they genuinely don't remember it that way because they've constructed a narrative where their intentions are always good and therefore their impact can't be that bad. When you point out a pattern, they genuinely think you're obsessing because they don't see patterns in their own behavior, only isolated incidents that have explanations. They're not consciously lying when they question your reality. They've just built an entire personality around never being wrong, and that requires making everyone else questionable instead. You also have to get comfortable with the manipulator's reaction when you stop questioning yourself, when you maintain your boundary without defending it, when you state what happened without hedging, when you trust your perception despite their questioning. They'll escalate. They'll question harder, bring in more doubt, maybe recruit others to agree that you're being unreasonable. This is the test. Can you hold on to your reality when someone is actively trying to make you abandon it? Can you trust yourself when trusting yourself means accepting that someone you care about is treating you in ways that aren't okay? Most people fail this test the first few times because the pressure is immense and the training to self-doubt is deep. But each time you maintain your perception, despite the questioning, you rebuild a little bit of the foundation they destroyed. This creates a dynamic where the person being manipulated feels isolated even when they try to get outside perspective. When you tell someone else what happened, you find yourself hedging and qualifying because you've internalized the manipulator's questioning. You say things like, maybe I'm wrong, but, or I could be overreacting, but, or they didn't mean it this way, but. You've learned to question yourself preemptively because you've been trained that your perspective will be questioned anyway. And sometimes the people you talk to, if they haven't experienced this kind of manipulation themselves, will actually agree that maybe you're being too sensitive or reading too much into things, which confirms what the manipulator has been telling you and drives you further into isolation and self-doubt. The cost of staying in this dynamic is you lose your ability to trust yourself, not just about the relationship, but about everything. If you can't trust your own perception of what happened in a conversation, how can you trust your judgment about anything? You become dependent on the manipulator to tell you what's real because they've systematically destroyed your confidence in your own reality testing. This is the goal, whether conscious or not. A person who questions themselves is easier to control than a person who trusts their own perception. You'll accept behavior you'd never accept if you trusted yourself. You'll stay in situations you'd leave if you believed your own assessment of those situations. You become manageable, and the manipulator gets to keep doing what they're doing without ever having to look at themselves honestly. Breaking free requires rebuilding your trust in your own perception, and that's harder than it sounds because the foundation of that trust has been systematically dismantled. You have to start small, noticing when your initial reaction to something is later questioned away, and sitting with that initial reaction instead of immediately abandoning it. You have to practice saying, I know what I experienced, without needing to prove it or defend it, or get anyone else to validate it. You have to recognize that someone questioning your reality is not the same as someone proving your reality wrong, and that you don't owe anyone a defense of your own experience. This feels impossible at first, because you've been trained to question yourself reflexively, but it's the only way out,